He used to be a lion. Now he looks like a mule. Once a man who chased the night, argued philosophy until sunrise, and lived on his own terms, now reduced to a hollow figure, pushing a grocery cart like he's serving a sentence, shoulders bent, eyes empty, checking off a list written in someone else's handwriting. You've seen him. Maybe you are him. The man who once lived wild and free, now calculating whether the joint account can handle a block of fancy cheese, rehearsing the apology he'll need if he forgot the brand of yogurt, a warrior turned house pet, a rebel turned errand boy. And here's the part that stings. This isn't rare. It's the new normal. Walk through any suburb on a Saturday morning. You'll see men who used to command boardrooms, asking permission to grab a beer. Fighters who once broke rules now whispering, "Is it okay if?" Leaders who once carried vision now negotiating for scraps of sleep. This didn't happen by accident. It's not maturity. It's not love. It's a slow, engineered process that drains men of their fire until they forget who they ever were. And today, I'm going to rip the mask off. I'm going to show you the machine that turns lions into donkeys. If you've ever felt your freedom slipping away one compromise at a time, stay here. Because what I'm about to show you will change the way you see yourself, your relationship, and the cage you didn't even realize you were building. He didn't wake up one day and suddenly trade his fire for a leash. It didn't happen with one dramatic decision. It happened drip by drip. A little compromise here, a little surrender there. At first, each one seemed harmless, even admirable. Who would argue against being considerate? Who would resist being a good partner? But over time, those small choices added up. And what they built wasn't love. It was a cage. That's the tragedy most men don't see until it's too late. The man who once ran his own life now finds himself rehearsing apologies in grocery aisles. The man who once thrived on risk now double-checks every move with headquarters before acting. The man who once called the shots now waits for approval on the smallest decisions. What used to be instinct is now hesitation. What used to be freedom is now negotiation. And it's not just one man. Take a walk through any neighborhood on a Saturday morning. You'll see the same pattern repeated in dozens of driveways and kitchens. Men who once led companies now asking for clearance to buy a six-pack. Former rebels who once broke rules without blinking now asking if it's okay to stay out an extra hour. Champions who once conquered real obstacles now arguing for the right to sleep in. Look closer, and you'll see something that should terrify you. The domestication is everywhere. The system is subtle. It doesn't break men overnight. It rewires them gradually. That's why so many don't even notice it's happening. Each concession feels like maturity. Each lost freedom gets rebranded as compromise. Each piece of individuality gets reframed as selfishness. And by the time the transformation is complete, the man is unrecognizable not just to the world, but to himself. Why is this so powerful? Because it isn't sold as control, it's sold as love. Marriage, at least the modern version of it, is marketed like the ultimate partnership. Two equals joining forces to take on life together. The commercials are perfect shared dreams, mutual support, a teammate who has your back forever. Who wouldn't want that? The pitch is genius. But here's the sinister twist. The reality doesn't look like a merger. It looks like a takeover. One person slowly takes the role of CEO, setting the direction, controlling the resources, planning the future. The other person, he becomes the employee who funds it all. The demotion is so gradual that most men don't recognize what just happened. At first, it's our money, but she manages the budget. Then it's our calendar, but she decides the plans. Before long, it's our life, but only one person is actually steering the wheel. And this is where the trap tightens. Modern marriage doesn't just create emotional dependency, it creates economic dependency too. Through joint accounts, shared mortgages, and merged assets. A man finds himself handcuffed to financial decisions he didn't even make. The trick is in how it's presented. It's never, "I control the money." It's always, "We need to be responsible." It sounds noble, but it's a prison. He works long hours to fund a lifestyle he didn't choose. He pays for a house he didn't pick. He fills it with furniture he doesn't like. He maintains standards he never agreed to. His energy powers a dream that isn't his own. He isn't building his vision of life. He's financing hers. The psychological damage of this setup is devastating. When a man's effort becomes disconnected from his own agency, when his labor fuels goals he never set, he doesn't just lose control, he loses himself. Psychologists have a name for this learned helplessness. The moment resistance feels pointless, the man stops fighting. He settles into the role of provider, not because it fulfills him, but because it's the only role left. He convinces himself there's honor in it, that being useful is enough, that serving others is the same thing as being himself. And here's where the story turns darker. Because once a man accepts that role, once he learns to silence his own desires for the sake of peace, the rest of the transformation becomes effortless. What begins with finances doesn't end with finances. It expands into friendships, choices, identity, and even his sense of worth. That's how lions become donkeys, not with a crash, but with a whisper. Once a man accepts the role of provider, the system doesn't stop there. It moves in on his social world. Because here's the truth, as long as a man has brothers, mentors, or even just drinking buddies to remind him of who he was before, he isn't fully under control. So the next stage is simple: dismantle his independent network, piece by piece. It rarely starts with open demands. It begins with caring questions. Don't you think you spend too much time with those guys? Wouldn't you rather spend Friday night with me? Your friends are still acting like they're in college. The words sound gentle, even logical. After all, what kind of husband chooses poker night over quality time at home? But buried inside those questions is a powerful reframing. Friendships stop being friendships. They become competition. Every hour spent with the guys is painted as stolen from the relationship. Every laugh with them is portrayed as a betrayal. And slowly, the world shrinks. The weekly poker game slips to once a month, then to every few months. Then it disappears entirely. The hiking group gets replaced with home projects. The spontaneous hangouts fade beneath couple dinners and family time. Before he realizes what's happening, the man's network collapses. His circle is gone. The voices that once challenged him, grounded him, reminded him of his identity, silenced. This isolation serves a clear purpose. Without outside perspectives, he has no way of knowing whether his reality is normal or not. Without old friends who remember his fire, he loses connection to the self he once carried with pride. With no other support systems, his spouse becomes his only source of companionship, approval, and validation. She becomes both his jailer and his lifeline. And once that dependency sets in, reshaping him becomes effortless. That's when the constant stream of low-level criticism begins. Not screaming, not explosions. Just steady drops of dissatisfaction wearing him down like water cutting stone. You should dress better. You really should eat healthier. You waste too much time on sports. You're not ambitious enough. You should call your mom more often. You spend too much money on hobbies. On their own, each line sounds harmless, but when stacked together, they deliver one clear message: the man as he is unpolished, imperfect, authentic is not good enough. And the brilliance of this system is how it hides behind deniability. When he pushes back, the criticism morphs into concern. I just want you to be your best self. I only want what's good for you. Isn't helping each other grow what marriage is all about? Suddenly, he's not defending his right to exist as himself. He's made to feel guilty for resisting improvement. This constant correction rewires him. He learns to second-guess his instincts. He starts outsourcing his decisions. Should I buy this shirt? Is it okay if I grab drinks after work? Can I sleep in on Saturday? His inner compass gets replaced by an external approval system that never really grants him comfort. What once came naturally decisive action now feels dangerous without a green light. And here's the cruel irony: many men convince themselves this is maturity, that asking for permission is the same as being considerate, that silencing their voice is the same as keeping the peace. But what's really happening is much darker. Bit by bit, the system is training men to distrust themselves, to abandon their instincts, to believe their own desires are a liability. What began as financial dependency and now extends into identity itself. And this isn't just about lost hobbies or canceled hangouts. It's about stripping a man of the spaces where he once felt alive, competent, and free. Once those are gone, what's left? A man who doesn't recognize his own reflection. A man who no longer acts from strength, but from fear of disapproval. A man who has learned to exist only through someone else's permission. And that's the point. Because once you've broken his confidence, once you've convinced him that he can't trust his own judgment, you don't need chains. You don't need threats. He becomes his own jailer. He polices himself. He censors his own desires. He kills his own fire before it has a chance to burn. Once a man stops trusting his own judgment, it becomes easy to strip away the last pieces of his freedom. The next target is his passions, the hobbies and pursuits that once made him feel alive. These aren't just activities. They're lifelines to his old identity. They're where he felt skilled, independent, and authentic. And because of that, they have to go. The attack is subtle. It doesn't come in the form of outright bans. It comes in the language of practicality. Does this hobby make money? Does it help the family? Does it improve the home? If not, then it's labeled as waste. Video games, immature. Sports, pointless. Music, just noise. Reading, antisocial. Working, on cars. Messy and time-consuming. One by one, the passions that once gave him joy are dismissed, downgraded, and eventually replaced. They aren't outright forbidden. They're starved. Starved by time, by budget, by endless more important obligations. Household projects, family errands, and yard work slide into their place. On the surface, it looks like productivity. But underneath, the man is starving. He's busy but not engaged. He's useful but not passionate. His energy is constantly directed outward, rarely inward. And this shift has consequences. Those hobbies weren't just entertainment. They were anchors to his authentic self. They were proof that he existed outside of service. When they disappear, he loses access to the last spaces where he felt whole. What's left isn't balance. It's emptiness, disguised as responsibility. But the process doesn't stop with hobbies. It goes after something deeper: basic autonomy. Think about this. Things that every grown man once did freely now become privileges that require negotiation. Going out with friends, buying something small, taking a new job, even visiting family. Each of these, once normal, now demands approval. The progression is always the same. First, it's framed as consideration. What do you think about me doing this? Then it becomes consultation. Is it okay if I do this? Finally, it becomes supplication. Please, let me do this. Every step feels like a small concession, but the direction is always downward, away from independence and toward submission. At some point, the man realizes he no longer acts like an equal partner. He acts like an employee requesting time off. And the psychological effect is brutal. When every choice requires approval, the man learns not to choose at all. He stops exercising his own will. He stops listening to his own instincts. His desires don't just come second, they stop existing. Psychologists call this learned helplessness. He becomes conditioned to believe that his preferences don't matter, that resistance is pointless, and that the safest path is silence. What keeps him locked in this cycle isn't just fear, it's guilt. The marriage system has perfected guilt as a weapon. Every natural desire is reframed and selfish. Want time to yourself. You're neglecting the family. Want to spend money on your hobby. You're being irresponsible. Want to see friends. You're choosing them over your spouse. The guilt comes from all directions. Practical guilt. We can't afford that. Moral guilt. That's not what a good husband does. Social guilt. What will people think? Emotional guilt. It hurts me when you choose that over us. No matter where he turns, he runs into another wall of shame. And the genius of this system, it convinces him he's not being controlled. He's being considerate. He's not being silenced. He's maturing. He's not being caged. He's choosing love. But the truth is clear. The guilt has made him the architect of his own prison. He polices himself so effectively that no one else has to. Over time, he loses the ability to even tell the difference between healthy compromise and total surrender. His moral compass has been rewired to always place others' needs above his own. He begins to see self-respect as selfishness, autonomy as immaturity, and sacrifice as virtue. Therapists have a name for this too: pathological selflessness. It's the inability to advocate for yourself without drowning in guilt. And here's the quiet tragedy by this point. He doesn't just live in the cage. He's convinced himself he built it for love. If any of this feels uncomfortably familiar, don't look away, because understanding how the cage is built is the first step to finding the key. Stay with me, because in the next part, we'll go even deeper into how this process strips men of their very identity. By the time guilt has done its work, the man's identity itself is on the chopping block. What made him unique? What made him magnetic? What made him slowly dissolves. It starts with little phrases. We like this restaurant. We prefer staying in. We enjoy this show. At first, it feels like bonding, a couple merging tastes, sharing experiences, building a life together. But look closer, and you'll see the shift. His individuality fades into we. His humor bends to her sensibilities. His music taste softens to avoid conflict. His opinions round off until they're safe. Dissent isn't just disagreement anymore, it's betrayal. He doesn't notice the erosion because it feels like harmony. But day by day, he becomes less authentic and more compatible. A diluted version of himself. And one morning, years later, he looks in the mirror and realizes he doesn't remember what he used to like, what he used to believe, or who he even was before. This isn't just sad, it's a crisis. Because the woman who once fell in love with his fire, his boldness, his individuality, now finds herself with a man who's passive, compliant, and dimmed. The traits she admired have been stripped away. The irony. She often resents him for the very changes she unconsciously demanded. Marriage in this form works like an energy harvesting system. It doesn't destroy a man's vitality outright. It repurposes it. His natural drive to explore, to create, to achieve is rerouted into domestic utility. The competitive spirit that once drove him to conquer obstacles now channels into earning more money. The creative spark that once fueled projects, art, or ambition now gets funneled into home renovations. His energy is evaluated for one thing only at how much it serves the household. Physical energy goes into fixing, repairing, maintaining. Mental energy goes into budgets, bills, and problem solving. Emotional energy goes into conflict management, mood management, and keeping the peace. Piece by piece, he stops being a man with a vision and becomes a power plant for someone else's dream. And the damage doesn't just show up in his schedule, it shows up in his soul. When a man's effort serves goals he didn't set, he loses connection to his own fire. He becomes driven by obligation instead of passion. He stops asking, "What do I want?" and starts asking, "What is needed of me?" That shift may sound noble, but over time it kills his vitality. The most devastating weapon in this process, though, isn't guilt. It's intimacy, or rather, the lack of it. What should be a space of unconditional love and connection often becomes conditional currency. Sex transforms from mutual joy into a reward system. Affection becomes contingent on good behavior. Love turns into performance review. He learns that intimacy isn't freely shared, it has to be earned. And so he performs. He monitors her moods like a nervous employee watching his boss. He edits his words, his behavior, even his desires, just to keep access to closeness. Over time, he isn't a man in a relationship. He's an actor in a role. And that role isn't built on who he is, it's built on what earns approval. Psychologists have a term for this conditional love. The belief that acceptance is tied to performance, not to existence. Men internalize it deeply. They start to believe they must do in order to be worthy. They stop being human beings and become human doings. Even achievement itself gets rewritten. Personal accomplishments shrink in value. Household contributions become the new scoreboard. That big promotion, less important than painting the bathroom. That creative project, backseat to planning the family trip. Individual success isn't celebrated unless it translates directly into household utility. And this conditioning runs deep. It tells men that what really matters isn't fulfillment, growth, or adventure. It's keeping the family stable, keeping the partner happy, keeping the system running. Each message sounds noble, but together, they erase a man's right to pursue his own dreams for their own sake. He learns to suppress ambition, to bury passion, to trade adventure for safety. By now, the lion isn't just tamed, he's been reprogrammed. His fire doesn't roar outward anymore. It burns quietly inside a cage, fueling everyone else's needs but his own. And this is where the crisis deepens, because when identity, energy, intimacy, and achievement are all rewired, what's left of the man? Only the shell, only the role, only the domesticated version optimized for everyone else's comfort. By this stage, the damage is no longer hidden. You can see it in his posture. You can hear it in his voice. You can feel it in the way he hesitates before every decision. The confident man who once trusted his instincts now second-guesses everything, not because he doesn't know what he wants, but because he's terrified of choosing wrong. This is what psychologists call hypervigilance. It's the state of being constantly on edge, scanning for danger, waiting for disapproval. He checks his phone obsessively, studying the tone of each text, the meaning of each emoji. He replays conversations in his head before they even happen, rehearsing his words like a nervous actor hoping to avoid a bad review. He questions every choice, whether to buy a shirt, whether to stop for a drink, whether to speak his mind. Living in this state of permanent alert breaks him down. Sleep becomes shallow or disappears altogether. His body rebels with stress symptoms, digestive issues, headaches, anxiety spirals. Depression takes root. The warrior who once thrived in chaos becomes fragile, jumpy, and small. He tiptoes through life like a man walking on broken glass. And here's the cruel genius of the system. Anxious men are easier to control than confident ones. An anxious man won't push back. He won't demand respect. He won't risk conflict. His fear makes him compliant, and his silence makes him manageable. What once made him powerful, his boldness, his decisiveness, has been swapped for hesitation and caution. But the transformation doesn't stop at the present. It even reaches into his past. Because to survive the cage, he rewrites his own memories. He convinces himself he was never really that free, never really that bold. He tells himself his bachelor days were shallow, reckless, immature. His independence was selfish. His confidence was arrogance. This is memory modification, and it serves a purpose. It reduces the pain of loss by devaluing what was lost. It turns decline into a story of growth. It makes the cage feel like a choice rather than a trap. And with every retelling, the authentic self fades further into the shadows, until even he believes the lie that this version of himself is better than the man he used to be. At this point, marriage installs a replacement identity, one optimized not for freedom, but for function. The man learns to measure worth not by who he is, but by how useful he is. Service replaces self. Utility replaces individuality. Stability becomes the highest virtue, even when it means suffocating growth. Security trumps adventure, even when the cost is a dead soul. The new language becomes second nature. Happy wife, happy life. Marriage is about compromise. Real men put family first. Each phrase sounds wise, but together they act like chains. He repeats them, believes them, lives by them. Until the bars of his cage no longer need guarding, he polices himself. What's most disturbing is how authentic this new identity feels to him. He doesn't think he's been tamed. He thinks he's matured. He doesn't believe he's surrendered. He believes he's grown. The fire he once carried isn't gone. It's been buried so deeply under duty that he no longer remembers it ever existed. And so, the lion doesn't just live in the cage. He becomes the cage. He doesn't just obey the system. He advocates for it. He sells it to other men, telling them this is what real adulthood looks like. He becomes a walking advertisement for his own domestication. Look around, and you'll see this everywhere. Men comparing themselves only to other caged men, assuming their shared misery is normal. They mistake collective decline for universal truth. And when every mirror reflects the same hollow face, they convince themselves the lion was never real to begin with. By the time the transformation feels complete, escape looks like an illusion. The price of freedom seems higher than the price of staying. Financially, he's locked down with mortgages, joint accounts, debts, and obligations tied to decisions he never really made. Socially, he's surrounded by other tamed men, convinced their collective misery is normal. Emotionally, he's so dependent on his partner for validation that the idea of leaving feels like cutting his own lifeline. But the most dangerous trap isn't outside, it's inside. Years of surrendering choices have atrophied his decision-making muscles. Years of chasing approval have silenced his inner compass. Years of defining himself by service have left him unsure whether he has any value beyond his usefulness. Even if he admits the prison exists, he doubts he has the strength to walk out. Economists call this switching costs, the barriers that make changing course more expensive than maintaining the status quo. And modern marriage has perfected those costs. The longer he stays, the harder escape becomes. Until finally, he convinces himself the cage is safer than the unknown. But this story doesn't end with him. It echoes forward. Boys grow up watching their fathers bend, apologize, and self-erase. They see men living not as leaders, but as laborers. And without a single word spoken, they learn the script. Masculinity means service. Love means surrender. Adulthood means obedience. These boys step into their own relationships, already half-tamed, already expecting to trade freedom for approval. The cycle tightens with every generation. And yet, even in the silence of domestication, cracks appear. Some men wake up to the ache in their chest. A health scare forces reflection. A career failure reveals how dependent they've become. Or maybe it's just the quiet horror of looking in the mirror and realizing they no longer recognize the man staring back. That moment is dangerous because it's the first spark of awakening. The cage is most effective when it convinces you it doesn't exist. But once you see the bars, you can never unsee them. The path back is brutal, but possible. It starts with honesty, admitting what was lost, what was surrendered, what pieces of yourself were sold for comfort and illusion. It means separating your role from your identity. Asking yourself, who was I before I became useful? What do I want, apart from what others demand? Reclaiming freedom doesn't happen in one explosion. It happens in small acts of defiance. Reconnecting with old friends, picking up a forgotten hobby, saying no to an unfair demand. Each step rebuilds the muscle of agency. Each choice reminds you that you still have a self beyond the system. And here's the truth. No one tells you you have the right to exist for yourself. Not as a resource, not as a provider, not as an emotional sponge, but as a man with your own fire, your own vision, your own worth. Real partnership isn't about one person absorbing the other. It's two whole people walking side by side without erasing themselves. The donkey life isn't destiny, it's design. And what was engineered can always be undone. The cage looks permanent, but it isn't. So here's the question you can't avoid. Will you keep dragging the cart, convincing yourself it's noble to live as someone else's beast of burden? Or will you take the hit, pay the price, and reclaim the fire that made you alive? Because here's the secret the system never wants you to realize: the door of the cage has always been unlocked. The only thing keeping you inside is you. And if this hit you in the gut, if you recognize pieces of yourself in every word, don't keep it to yourself. Share this. Send it to a man who needs to wake up. Subscribe. Stay with me. And don't forget this truth. Recognizing the cage is step 1. Walking out of it is step 2. The rest of your life begins the moment you decide you've carried enough weight for everyone but yourself.